The letter arrived in a crisp, white envelope, its edges sharp enough to cut through Caleb's heart. "You're not welcome," it read, the words scrawled in his sister's familiar cursive, banning him from her wedding his own sister, the one he'd carried on his shoulders as a kid. By the third family wedding he was excluded from, Caleb stopped counting the rejections, but each one carved deeper into his soul. Caleb sat on the edge of his couch in his small Brooklyn apartment, the letter crumpled in his fist. At 28, he'd built a life in New York, far from the suffocating small town in Ohio where he'd grown up. The city had promised freedom, a place where he could be himself, a gay man who didn't have to hide. But freedom came with a price: his family's love. His parents, devout and unyielding, had made it clear years ago that his lifestyle was a sin they couldn't accept. One by one, his siblings followed suit, each wedding invitation a reminder of the life he'd been exiled from. He tossed the letter onto the coffee table, where it joined a pile of unopened bills and takeout menus. Across the room, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Ryan, his boyfriend of 2 years. "Meet me at the park. Need to see you." Caleb's chest loosened slightly. Ryan was his anchor, the one person who made the world feel less like a battlefield. He grabbed his denim jacket and headed out into the crisp autumn evening, the city's hum a faint comfort against the ache in his heart. The park was their place, a quiet corner of Brooklyn where they'd first met. Ryan had been sketching on a bench, his charcoal-stained fingers dancing over a sketch pad, when Caleb tripped over his bag and spilled coffee everywhere. Ryan had laughed, handed him a napkin, and said, "You owe me a new page." 2 years later, they were inseparable, their love a defiant spark in a world that often felt too cold. Ryan was already there, sitting on their usual bench, his black hair catching the last rays of sunlight. He looked up as Caleb approached, his hazel eyes warm but shadowed with concern. "Another one?" he asked, nodding toward the crumpled letter Caleb hadn't realized he was still clutching. "Yeah," Caleb said, his voice rough. "Sarah's wedding. Same story." He sat beside Ryan, their knees brushing. The silence between them was heavy, not with tension, but with shared understanding. Ryan reached for his hand, his leather bracelet cool against Caleb's skin. "They don't deserve you," Ryan said softly, but there was an edge to his tone, a fire that Caleb loved and feared. "I just thought," Caleb's voice cracked. "I thought maybe this time they'd let me in. She's my little sister. You know. I taught her how to ride a bike." He laughed bitterly, the memory stinging. Ryan squeezed his hand, his grip firm. "You don't need their approval to be who you are," he said. "But I know it hurts." Caleb leaned his head back, staring at the sky as it deepened to indigo. He'd spent years trying to make peace with his family's rejection, but each new slight reopened the wound. He wasn't just banned from their weddings. He was banned from their lives. No Christmas dinners, no birthday calls, no place in the family photos that lined their Ohio home. And yet, he couldn't stop hoping for a crack in their resolve, a moment where they'd see him not as a sinner, but as their son, their brother. Ryan shifted closer, his voice low. "What if we stopped waiting for them to change?" he asked. "What if we showed them what love really looks like?" Caleb turned to him, confused. Ryan's eyes gleamed with something fierce, something that made Caleb's pulse quicken. "Marry me," Ryan said, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. Let's have our own wedding. Let's invite them all and show them what they're missing. Caleb's breath caught. Marriage had been a distant dream, something they'd talked about in quiet moments but never planned. The idea of standing in front of his family, declaring his love for Ryan, felt like both a rebellion and a reckoning. "You're serious?" he said. Not a question, but a realization. Ryan nodded, his smile a mix of mischief and resolve. "Dead serious. Let's do it. Let's make it big, bold, and so undeniably us that they can't look away." The idea was reckless, impossible, exhilarating. Caleb's family would never come. They'd probably burn the invitation before reading it. But as he looked at Ryan, at the man who'd chosen him despite the world's judgment, he felt a spark of courage ignite. Maybe this was his chance not just to marry the love of his life, but to make a statement that would echo beyond the walls of his family's rejection. "Okay," Caleb said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Let's do it." Ryan's face broke into a grin, and he pulled Caleb into a kiss, fierce and unapologetic. The park around them faded, the city's noise a distant hum. For the first time in years, Caleb felt like he was fighting back. They spent the next hour on that bench, planning in whispers as the stars emerged. A wedding in New York, open to everyone who'd ever stood by them. A celebration of love, not just theirs but the kind that defied hate and fear. Caleb imagined his family's faces, the ones who'd shunned him, confronted with a love they couldn't ignore. It wouldn't change them wasn't naive, but it would change him. It would be his declaration. He was done begging for their acceptance. As they walked back to their apartment, hand in hand, Caleb felt the weight of the letter in his pocket lighten. The pain was still there, raw and sharp, but so was the promise of something new. He wasn't just planning a wedding. He was planning a revolution. The next morning, Caleb woke to the smell of coffee and the sight of Ryan hunched over his sketchpad at their tiny kitchen table. Pages were scattered around him, filled with rough sketches of venues, floral arrangements, and a suit design that made Caleb's heart skip. "You're up early," Caleb said, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Ryan grinned, holding up a drawing of two figures standing under an arch of wildflowers. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "This wedding's gonna be epic." Caleb poured himself a coffee, the warmth of the mug grounding him as he sat beside Ryan. The idea of their wedding had seemed like a dream in the park, but in the morning light, it felt real and daunting. "We're really doing this," he said, half to himself. Ryan reached for his hand, his fingers still smudged with charcoal. "We are. And it's gonna be ours, not theirs." They started small, mapping out the basics. A venue in Brooklyn, maybe a rooftop with a view of the skyline. A guest list that included their chosen family friends who'd become their lifeline in the city. And, against Caleb's better judgment, invitations for his entire family. Even if they don't come, Ryan said, they need to know they were invited. Let them carry that. Caleb nodded, though the thought of mailing those invitations made his stomach churn. He could already imagine his mother's pursed lips, his father's cold silence, his siblings' awkward excuses. But Ryan was right. This wasn't about their approval anymore. It was about claiming his place in the world, unapologetically. They spent weeks planning, stealing moments between Caleb's shifts at the bookstore and Ryan's freelance art gigs. They chose a rooftop venue in Williamsburg, a place with exposed brick and string lights that felt like an extension of their park. They met with a florist who promised wildflowers in every color, a rebellion against the stiff, white roses of traditional weddings. Caleb found himself smiling more, laughing at Ryan's terrible puns as they tasted cake samples or argued over playlists. For the first time in years, he felt like he was building something, not just surviving. But the weight of his family's rejection lingered. One evening, as they addressed invitations, Caleb hesitated over his parents' names. What if they show up just to make a scene? He asked, his pen hovering over the card. Ryan looked up, his expression softening. Then we handle it together. They don't get to ruin this. Caleb nodded, but doubt gnawed at him. He remembered the last time he'd seen his parents. 3 years ago at a tense Thanksgiving. His mother had prayed for his healing at the dinner table, her voice trembling with conviction. His father had barely looked at him. The memory still burned, a reminder of the love he'd lost. But Ryan's hand on his shoulder pulled him back. We're not doing this for them, Ryan said. We're doing it for us. For everyone who's ever felt like they don't belong. The invitations went out, a small act of defiance wrapped in cream-colored envelopes. Caleb's hands shook as he dropped them in the mailbox, each one a tiny grenade lobbed at his past. He didn't expect replies, but the act of sending them felt like reclaiming a piece of himself. Ryan stood beside him, his presence a steady anchor. Proud of you, he whispered, and Caleb felt the words settle deep in his chest. As the wedding date approached, their apartment became a whirlwind of plans and emotions. Friends pitched in, offering to DJ or bake desserts. Their friend Mia, a photographer, promised to capture every moment, her excitement infectious. But Caleb couldn't shake the fear that his family's absence would cast a shadow over the day. He didn't want their rejection to define the wedding, but it was hard to let go of the hope that someone might show up. One night, as they lay in bed, Ryan traced circles on Caleb's arm. What do you want this day to mean? He asked. Caleb thought for a moment, the question cutting through his doubts. I want it to be a celebration, he said finally. Not just of us, but of everyone who's fought to love who they are. I want it to be loud, proud, and so full of joy that it drowns out the hate. Ryan smiled, pulling him close. Then that's what we'll make it. They fell asleep tangled together, the future both thrilling and terrifying. Caleb didn't know what his family would do, but he knew he wasn't alone anymore. He had Ryan, their friends, and a vision of a day that would be unapologetically theirs. The weeks flew by, and soon the rooftop was booked, the flowers ordered, and the suits tailored. Caleb found himself standing in front of a mirror, trying on a navy suit with a subtle plaid pattern. Ryan Wolf whistled from the doorway, making him blush. You're gonna break hearts in that, Ryan teased, but his eyes were soft, full of love. Caleb looked at himself, seeing not just the man he was, but the man he was becoming, someone who could face his past and still choose joy. The first RSVP came from Mia, a bright hell yes, scrawled across the card. Others followed, friends, co-workers, even their favorite barista from the coffee shop down the street. Each one felt like a brick in the foundation of their new life. But the silence from Caleb's family was deafening. He checked the mailbox daily, hoping for a miracle, dreading the confirmation of their absence. Nothing came. 2 weeks before the wedding, Caleb's phone rang. The Ohio area code stopped him cold. It was his brother, Ethan, the only sibling who'd ever seemed to waver in his judgment. "Caleb." Ethan's voice was hesitant. "I got your invitation." Caleb's heart pounded, but he kept his tone steady. "Yeah. You coming?" There was a long pause. "I want to," Ethan said finally. "But Mom and Dad, they're not happy about it. They're saying it's a provocation." Caleb's grip tightened on the phone. "It's not about them," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's about me and Ryan. If you can't handle that, don't come." Ethan didn't respond right away. And when he did, it was a quiet, "I'll think about it." The call ended, leaving Caleb staring at the wall, torn between hope and resignation. Ryan found him later, sitting on the fire escape, the city sprawling below. Ethan called, Caleb said, recounting the conversation. Ryan listened, his jaw tight. "He's got a choice to make," Ryan said. "Just like you did. You chose to live your truth. He's got to decide if he's brave enough to stand with you." Caleb nodded, but the words didn't ease the ache. Ethan had been his closest sibling, the one who'd snuck him comic books when their parents banned them. The thought of losing him too was almost unbearable. The wedding plans pushed forward, a welcome distraction. They finalized the playlist, a mix of indie rock and classic love songs that felt like them. They wrote their vows in secret, each stealing glances at the other's notebook, laughing when caught. But beneath the excitement, Caleb felt the weight of his family's absence growing heavier. He didn't want their rejection to define the day, but it was hard to ignore the empty space where they should have been. One evening, they met with their officiant, a warm woman named Clara who'd married countless queer couples. She listened to their story, her eyes kind but sharp. "This wedding isn't just about you two," she said. "It's a statement. You're showing the world and your family what love can be. Don't let their fear dim your light." Her words stuck with Caleb, a reminder that this was bigger than his pain. It was about every person who'd ever been told their love was wrong. The night before the rehearsal dinner, Caleb and Ryan hosted a small gathering at their apartment. Friends filled the space, their laughter a balm to Caleb's nerves. Mia snapped candid photos, capturing Ryan stealing a kiss or Caleb blushing at a toast. For a moment, Caleb forgot about the empty chairs that might await them at the wedding. These people his chosen family were enough. But later, as he cleaned up empty wine glasses, his phone buzzed again. Another Ohio number. This time, it was his mother. Her voice was cold, clipped. "Caleb, this wedding is a mistake. You're embarrassing the family." He stood frozen, the words slicing through him. "Mom," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it because I love him." She didn't respond, just hung up, leaving Caleb with the echo of her disapproval. He didn't tell Ryan about the call. He couldn't bear to see the hurt in his eyes, not when they were so close to their day. Instead, he poured his energy into the final preparations, double-checking the catering, the decorations, the vows he'd rewritten a dozen times. Each task was a small act of defiance, a way to drown out his mother's voice. The rehearsal dinner was a blur of joy and nerves. Their friends rallied around them, offering toasts that were equal parts heartfelt and hilarious. Ryan's hand stayed in Caleb's, a steady reminder of why they were doing this. As the night wound down, Caleb stood on the rooftop, looking out at the city lights. Ryan joined him, slipping an arm around his waist. "We're almost there," Ryan said. "You ready?" Caleb took a deep breath. The weight of his family's rejection still there, but lighter now, overshadowed by the love surrounding him. "Yeah," he said, leaning into Ryan. "I'm ready." The city glittered below, a canvas of possibility. Tomorrow, they'd stand together and make their vows, not just to each other, but to a world that needed to see their love. And maybe, just maybe, someone from his family would show up to witness it. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, the October sky a perfect blue over Brooklyn. Caleb stood in their apartment, staring at his reflection in the mirror. His navy suit fit like a second skin, the subtle plaid catching the light. Ryan had insisted on getting ready separately, a nod to tradition that made Caleb smile despite his nerves. He adjusted his tie, his hands trembling slightly. Today was the day he'd claim his happiness, no matter who showed up or didn't. The rooftop venue was transformed. Wildflowers spilled over the edges of tables, their colors vibrant against the brick walls. String lights hung in delicate arcs, ready to glow as the sun set. Mia darted around, her camera clicking as she captured the setup. Caleb arrived early, helping to arrange chairs, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and dread. Every time the elevator dinged, he glanced over, hoping for a familiar face from Ohio. But it was always a caterer, a musician, or a friend. Ryan arrived an hour later, his suit a deep charcoal that made his hazel eyes stand out. He grinned at Caleb, pulling him into a quick hug. "You look incredible," he whispered, his breath warm against Caleb's ear. Caleb laughed, the sound shaky. "You too. Let's do this." They stood together, hands clasped, as guests began to arrive. Friends filled the chairs, their faces bright with love and support. But the section reserved for Caleb's family remained empty. As the ceremony approached, Caleb's hope began to fade. He scanned the crowd, searching for Ethan, for anyone. The absence was a physical ache, but he pushed it down, focusing on Ryan's hand in his. Clara, the officiant, took her place under the wildflower arch, her smile a beacon of calm. The music started, a soft acoustic version of their favorite song, and Caleb felt his nerves settle. This was their moment. The ceremony was simple but profound. Clara spoke of love as a force that transcended fear, that built bridges where walls once stood. Caleb's vows came first, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "Ryan, you showed me what it means to be seen, to be loved for who I am. I promise to stand by you, to fight for us, and to choose joy every day, no matter what." Ryan's eyes glistened, and when it was his turn, his words were fierce and tender. "Caleb, you're my home. I promise to hold your hand through every storm and to make sure you never feel alone again." They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that felt heavy with meaning. The crowd cheered, a wave of love washing over them. Caleb kissed Ryan, the world fading to just the two of them. Their lips a promise sealed in defiance and hope. For a moment, the empty chairs didn't matter. This was enough. But as they turned to face their guests, Caleb's eyes caught a figure at the back of the rooftop. Ethan. His brother stood alone, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. Caleb's heart lurched. He hadn't expected anyone to come, least of all Ethan, who'd been so torn on the phone. Ryan followed his gaze, his grip tightening on Caleb's hand. "Go," he whispered. "Talk to him." Caleb walked toward his brother, the crowd parting around him. Ethan looked older than he remembered, his jaw tight, his eyes wary. "You came," Caleb said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, glancing at the ground. "I wasn't sure I would, but I couldn't stay away." There was a pause, heavy with years of unspoken words. "I'm not here to fight," Ethan added. I needed to see you." Caleb didn't know what to say. He wanted to hug his brother, to scream at him, to ask why it had taken so long. Instead, he said, "I'm glad you're here." Ethan's eyes softened, and for a moment, Caleb saw the boy who'd shared his comic books, not the man who'd stood by while their family shut him out. They didn't have long to talk. The reception was starting, and Ryan was waving Caleb back to the dance floor. Ethan hesitated, then followed, taking a seat at the edge of the crowd. Caleb felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real. Maybe this was a start, a crack in the wall his family had built. The reception was a blur of laughter, music, and toasts. Mia's photos captured every moment, Ryan spinning Caleb on the dance floor, their friends raising glasses, the wildflowers glowing under the string lights. Ethan stayed, watching quietly, his presence a small but significant victory. Caleb didn't know if it would change anything, but for now, it was enough that he was there. As the night wound down, Caleb and Ryan stood together, watching their friends dance under the stars. "We did it," Ryan said, his voice soft with wonder. Caleb nodded, his heart full. The empty chairs still stung, but they were overshadowed by the love that filled the rooftop. This was their statement, their rebellion, their joy. And it was only the beginning. The reception stretched into the early hours, the rooftop alive with music and laughter. Caleb and Ryan moved through the crowd, their hands never far from each other. Ethan's presence lingered in Caleb's mind, a quiet question mark amidst the celebration. He caught his brother's eye once or twice, but Ethan stayed on the sidelines, nursing a drink, his expression guarded. Caleb didn't push. Just having him there felt like a miracle, however small. As the DJ played a slow song, Ryan pulled Caleb onto the dance floor. They swayed together, the city lights a glittering backdrop. "You okay?" Ryan asked, his voice low. Caleb nodded, though his chest ached with the weight of Ethan's tentative step toward reconciliation. I didn't think anyone would come," he admitted. Ryan's arms tightened around him. "He's here. That's something. And we've got everyone else who matters." Caleb glanced at their friends, their chosen family, who filled the rooftop with warmth. Mia was snapping photos, her grin infectious. Their friend Javier was leading an impromptu conga line, his laughter booming. This was the life they'd built, the love they'd fought for. But Ethan's presence stirred something deeper, a longing for the family Caleb had lost, and a hope that maybe, just maybe, he could reclaim a piece of it. After the dance, Caleb found Ethan near the bar, staring at the skyline. "You're staying for this?" Caleb asked, gesturing to the party. Ethan shrugged, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Didn't expect it to be so alive," he said. "You and Rhiannon good together." The words were simple, but they hit Caleb like a wave. He hadn't realized how much he'd needed to hear them. They talked for a while, their conversation cautious but honest. Ethan admitted he'd argued with their parents about coming, that he'd almost turned back at the airport. "They think this is you throwing your life away," he said, his voice heavy. "But seeing you here, I don't know. Caleb, you look happy." Caleb swallowed the lump in his throat. "I am," he said. "Happier than I've ever been." Ethan didn't stay much longer. He hugged Caleb before he left. A quick, awkward embrace that felt like a promise. "I'll call you," he said, and Caleb wanted to believe him. As Ethan disappeared into the elevator, Caleb felt a mix of relief and grief. One brother had shown up, but the rest of his family was still a void. He returned to Ryan, who was laughing with Mia over a spilled drink. "Everything okay?" Ryan asked, reading his face. Caleb nodded, managing a smile. "Yeah. Let's keep dancing." The rest of the night was a whirlwind. They cut the cake, a three-tiered masterpiece with wildflower accents. They toasted to love, to resilience, to a future they'd build together. As the guests began to leave, Caleb and Ryan stood under the arch, the string lights casting a soft glow. "We made it," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. Ryan kissed his forehead. "We did. And we're just getting started." The next morning, they woke in their apartment, still in their suits, the bed a tangle of sheets and memories. Caleb's phone buzzed with messages from friends, photos from Mia, and a single text from Ethan. "Thanks for inviting me. I'm proud of you." Caleb stared at the words, his eyes stinging. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a step. He showed the text to Ryan, who squeezed his shoulder. "Told you he'd come around," Ryan said, his voice warm. They spent the day unpacking gifts, reading cards, and reliving the night. But the high of the wedding was tempered by the reality of what came next. Caleb knew his family's rejection wouldn't vanish overnight. Ethan's presence was a crack in the wall, but the rest of his family remained steadfast in their disapproval. He wondered if they'd seen the photos Mia posted online, if they'd felt even a flicker of regret. That afternoon, Caleb and Ryan went back to the park, their bench a quiet refuge. They sat in silence for a while, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot. "What now?" Caleb asked, his voice soft. Ryan took his hand, his ring glinting in the sunlight. "Now we live," he said. "We build our life, our way. And if they come around, great. If not, we've got enough love to go around." Caleb leaned against him, the words settling into his bones. The wedding had been their statement, a declaration of love that echoed beyond the rooftop. But it was also a beginning promise to keep fighting, to keep loving, to keep choosing joy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb felt the weight of his family's absence. But it was lighter now, overshadowed by the life he was building with Ryan. The weeks after the wedding were a strange mix of bliss and reckoning. Caleb and Ryan settled into married life. Their apartment now filled with new rituals, morning coffee shared over Ryan's sketches, evenings curled up with takeout and old movies. The wedding photos arrived from Mia, each one a snapshot of joy, Caleb laughing as Ryan smeared cake on his face, their first dance under the string lights, Ethan's quiet smile in the background. But the high of the day couldn't erase the silence from the rest of Caleb's family. He tried to focus on the present, on the life he and Ryan were building. They talked about the future, maybe a dog, maybe a bigger apartment, maybe a trip to somewhere warm where they could just be. But the absence of his parents and siblings lingered like a bruise. Ethan's text had been a lifeline, but it hadn't opened the floodgates Caleb secretly hoped for. No calls, no letters, no sign that the wedding had changed anything for the rest of them. One evening, as they sorted through thank you notes, Ryan noticed Caleb's quiet mood. "You're thinking about them," he said. Not a question. Caleb sighed, setting down a card. "I just thought, maybe the wedding would make them see me differently. But it's like it never happened." Ryan reached for his hand, his touch steady. "It happened. We happened. And Ethan was there. That's not nothing." Caleb nodded, but the ache remained. He'd spent so long hoping for his family's acceptance, and the wedding had been his boldest attempt to show them who he was. Ethan's presence had been a victory, but it also highlighted the absence of everyone else. He wondered if he'd ever stop wanting their approval, if the hurt would ever fully fade. A few days later, Ethan called. Caleb's heart raced as he answered, hoping for more than a quick check-in. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, his voice hesitant. "About the wedding. About you and Ryan. I want to come visit. Maybe spend some time with you guys." Caleb's breath caught. "You mean that?" he asked. Ethan laughed, a nervous sound. "Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to do this, but I want to try. For you." The call was short, but it left Caleb reeling. He told Ryan, who grinned and pulled him into a hug. "See, told you he'd come around." They made plans for Ethan's visit, a weekend in a few weeks. Caleb felt a flicker of hope, but also fear. What if Ethan changed his mind? What if this was just another false start? As the visit approached, Caleb threw himself into preparations, cleaning the apartment, planning meals, trying to make everything perfect. Ryan teased him, calling him a nervous host. But Caleb could see the excitement in his eyes too. This was a chance to show Ethan their life, to bridge the gap that had grown between them. But Caleb couldn't shake the fear that Ethan's visit would bring more pain than healing. When Ethan arrived, he looked out of place in their Brooklyn apartment, his Ohio flannel clashing with the urban chaos outside. But his hug was warm, and his smile was genuine. They spent the day showing him their world, the park where they'd met, the bookstore where Caleb worked, the diner where Ryan had proposed in a fit of spontaneity. Ethan listened, asked questions, laughed at Ryan's stories. For the first time in years, Caleb felt like he had his brother back. That night, over pizza and beer, Ethan opened up. I didn't get it before, he said, his eyes on his plate. What it's like for you. Mom and Dad theory so stuck in their ways. But seeing you and Ryan, it's real. It's love. Caleb's throat tightened. He wanted to ask why it had taken so long, why Ethan hadn't stood up for him sooner. But he held back. This moment was too fragile, too precious. Ryan reached for Caleb's hand under the table, a silent reminder that they were in this together. We're glad you're here, Ryan said, his voice warm but firm. But Caleb deserves more than just you. He deserves all of you. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. I know, he said. I'm trying. I'll talk to them. I promise. The rest of the weekend was bittersweet. Ethan left with a promise to keep in touch, to try to sway their parents. Caleb wanted to believe him, but he'd heard promises before. Still, as he watched Ethan's cab disappear into the city, he felt a shift. Maybe this was the start of something new, not just with Ethan, but with himself. He was learning to let go of the family he'd lost and embrace the one he'd found. Ethan's visit left Caleb in a strange limbo, caught between hope and caution. He and Ryan slipped back into their routine, but the promise of Ethan's words lingered. Caleb checked his phone more than he cared to admit, waiting for a follow-up call, a text, anything to show that Ethan was serious about bridging the gap. Days turned into weeks, and the silence grew heavy again. Caleb tried to focus on the present and Ryan, on their life, but the ache for his family's acceptance refused to fade. One chilly November evening, Caleb came home from the bookstore to find Ryan at the kitchen table, his sketchpad open to a new drawing. It was a portrait of them at the wedding, their hands clasped, their faces lit with joy. For our wall, Ryan said, his smile soft. Caleb's heart swelled, but the sight of the drawing also stirred the pain of who hadn't been there. It's perfect, he said, kissing Ryan's forehead. Just like you. They hung the drawing above their couch, a reminder of the love that had carried them through. But later that night, as they watched a movie, Caleb's phone buzzed. It was an email from Ethan. Subject line, I talked to them. Caleb's stomach twisted as he opened it. The email was short but heavy. Ethan had confronted their parents, told them about the wedding, about Caleb's happiness. Their response was cold, more prayers for his salvation, more insistence that he was lost. But Ethan ended with a promise, I'm not giving up on them. Were you? Caleb showed the email to Ryan, who read it in silence. He's trying, Ryan said finally. That's more than you had before. Caleb nodded, but the words felt hollow. He'd spent years hoping for his parents' love, and each rejection was a fresh cut. Still, Ethan's effort was a lifeline, a sign that maybe, one day, things could change. The holidays loomed, a season that had always been painful for Caleb. He and Ryan decided to host their own Thanksgiving, inviting their chosen family to fill the apartment with warmth. Mia brought her famous pecan pie. Javier mixed cocktails, and their friend Lena told stories that had everyone in stitches. It was the kind of family Caleb had always wanted: loud, messy, loving. But as he carved the turkey, he couldn't help picturing his parents' table in Ohio, the empty chair where he used to sit. After dinner, Ethan called again. I'm coming back for Christmas, he said, his voice firm. And I'm bringing Sarah. Caleb froze. Sarah. His little sister. The one whose wedding had been the latest to exclude him. She wants to see you. Ethan continued. She's been asking about you. Caleb. I think the wedding shook her up. Caleb's heart raced. Hope and fear colliding. Okay, he said, his voice barely steady. We'll be here. The weeks leading up to Christmas were a blur of anticipation. Caleb and Ryan decorated their apartment, stringing lights and hanging ornaments, trying to make it a home Sarah would feel welcome in. Caleb couldn't stop wondering what had changed for her, why she was coming now. He remembered her as a teenager, all braces and giggles, trailing him around the house. The thought of seeing her again, after years of silence, was both thrilling and terrifying. When Ethan and Sarah arrived, Caleb barely recognized his sister. She was 22 now, her hair shorter, her eyes carrying a weight he didn't remember. The hug she gave him was tentative but real, and Caleb felt tears prick his eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to stand up to them before. Caleb held her tighter, unable to speak. Ethan stood behind her, his smile proud but cautious. They spent the day together. The four of them crowded around the tiny kitchen table. Sarah asked about the wedding, about Ryan, about their life in New York. Her questions were genuine, her curiosity a bridge across the years of distance. Ethan chimed in, sharing stories from the wedding, his pride in Caleb evident. Ryan kept the mood light, his jokes easing the tension. But Caleb could see the effort it took for Sarah to be there, to defy their parents' expectations. As they said goodbye, Sarah promised to stay in touch. I want to be part of your life, she said, her eyes fierce. I don't care what Mom and Dad say. Caleb believed her, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. Their parents' disapproval was a heavy shadow, one that might never lift. But as he watched Ethan and Sarah leave, he felt a shift. Two of his siblings had chosen him, had seen him. It wasn't everything, but it was enough for now. Christmas passed, and the new year brought a quiet hope. Caleb and Ryan settled into a rhythm, their marriage a steady anchor in the chaos of city life. Ethan and Sarah kept in touch, their texts and calls a lifeline that grew stronger with each conversation. But their parents remained silent, their disapproval a wall that showed no signs of crumbling. Caleb tried to focus on the progress two siblings was more than he'd had in years, but the ache for his parents' love lingered. One spring afternoon, Caleb received a package in the mail. It was from Sarah? A small box with a note tucked inside. Found this in the attic. Thought you should have it. Inside was a photo album, its pages yellowed but filled with memories family vacations. Caleb's high school graduation. Sarah as a toddler on his shoulders. Tucked between the pages was a letter from his mother, written years ago when he'd left for college. We're so proud of you. It read, You'll always be our son. The word stung, a reminder of a love that felt so distant now. Caleb showed the album to Ryan, who flipped through it with a soft smile. They loved you once, Ryan said. Maybe they still do, in their own messed up way. Caleb wasn't sure he believed that, but the album was a treasure, a piece of his past he could hold on to. He placed it on their shelf, next to the wedding drawing, a bridge between who he'd been and who he was becoming. Ethan and Sarah's visits became more frequent, each one a step toward healing. They talked about the past, about the pain of Caleb's exclusion, about the future they wanted to build together. Sarah admitted she'd been scared to reach out, afraid of their parents' reaction. Ethan confessed he'd spent years wrestling with guilt for staying silent. Their honesty was raw, sometimes painful, but it was real. Caleb felt his family taking shape again. Not the one he'd lost, but a new one, built on choice and love. One evening, as they walked through the park, Ryan stopped at their bench. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful, "our wedding wasn't just about us. It was about showing the world that love like ours matters." And it reached them, Ethan, Sarah, maybe others, too. Caleb nodded, the truth of it settling deep. Their wedding had been a statement, a spark that had ignited something in his siblings, maybe even in others who'd seen Mia's photos online. Months later, Sarah called with news. She was engaged. "And I want you there," she said, her voice firm. "Both of you." Caleb's heart swelled. It was the first family wedding he'd been invited to since coming out. He and Ryan flew to Ohio, nervous but hopeful. The wedding was small, held in a community center, but it was filled with love. Caleb stood beside Sarah as she said her vows, Ryan's hand in his, and for the first time in years, he felt like he belonged. Their parents were there, their faces tight with discomfort. They didn't speak to Caleb, but they didn't make a scene either. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a start. Ethan caught Caleb's eye during the reception, his smile a quiet victory. Sarah hugged them both before they left, whispering, "Thank you for showing me how to be brave." Back in Brooklyn, Caleb and Ryan sat on their fire escape, the city humming below. "We did more than get married," Caleb said, his voice soft. "We started something." Ryan nodded, his ring catching the moonlight. "We showed them love wins. And it's not over yet." The journey wasn't finished. Caleb knew his parents might never fully accept him, that the pain of their rejection would always linger. But he also knew he had Ryan, Ethan, Sarah, and a community that loved him fiercely. Their wedding had been a statement, a declaration that love could triumph over fear, that chosen family could be as strong as blood. And as they sat together, watching the stars over Brooklyn, Caleb felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. He was home,